Hey guys, how's it going? This is Collin here with Yoshima Recycling. Today we're going to be showing you how to rebuild your Chilao pedals. This is the same process for all the pedals we have, all the models, small, large, Ninja, everything you got. We'll show you what tools you need to take them apart, the cleaning process, assembling back together, a couple special tricks. We recommend doing this like 8 to 12 months depending on where you're at, what you're riding, and just how hard of a rider you are. And yeah. Let's go ahead and pull this apart and show you some tools and we'll get started. Okay, so for starters, obviously you're gonna need your Yoshima Chilao pedal. Whatever size, color, it's all the same with the same rebuild kit, same spindles, so the same process. Of course, you need your rebuild kit. You'll have your bushings, bearings, seal, the very important spacer, and a new overlock lock nut. For tools, the only specialty stuff you're gonna need is a 7/16 tap. And we have these on our website for about 15 bucks. And then a torque wrench with a 8mm bit and a 6mm hex key. Other stuff that might help you is a rubber mallet, some Motor X grease. If you have something else like park tool grease or muck off, you just want to put something good back in there because you only do this about every 8 to 12 months. My favorite, the zip tie. This is gonna help us seat the pedal seal within the body. Some Q-tips to clean out the old grease, and a couple picks. There we go. Some other stuff that might give you a hand is a 10mm Allen wrench and a Scotch-Brite or a Brillo pad. If you're doing pin replacement, obviously you'll need a 2.5mm Allen key, a wire brush in case you haven't touched your pedals in 2 years, you got a bunch of junk that needs to come off. Cool. Let's go ahead and pull this pedal apart and we'll get started. Go ahead and grab your 6mm Allen wrench. Use a good wrench for this. You don't want to risk stripping out the end cap, and give it a good, quick gesture to break it loose fast. Let's go ahead and get that pulled out. On some of your pedals, if you're riding pretty hard, you'll notice at the end is going to be pretty chewed up from hitting rocks. It's okay to get in there with some pliers and kind of break away any metal chips or a little bit of sandpaper. You just don't want to strip the threads going back in or get any kind of that loose metal into the pedal. Next up, grab your 8mm hex key and your 8mm deep socket. I'll just bring this close to my body and kind of break it loose. It is an overlock nut, so you'll feel some resistance through the threads. Get that pulled off. I'll use a small pick just to get the nut out of the socket. Next up, we want to dislodge the spindle from the body. The only thing holding it in there now is the seal, so don't hit it with a hammer or anything. You don't need to do that. I'll just take like an 8mm Allen wrench and just kind of hook my fingers on it, give it a little push, a little turn, and you'll feel it dislodge. And then you got your spindle with the seal. Sometimes the bearing and the spacer will come out together. If it doesn't, it's not a worry at all. We could just get it out with a pick or tapping the pedal on the table. Next up, go ahead and grab a 6mm Allen key. You might need to give it a light tap with a hammer, but we just want to get the outboard bearing off. It doesn't take much at all. It's a slide fit. It's designed to be easy to work on. So now we just have the pedal body, and the only thing left inside of it is that bushing. And we're gonna go ahead and pull that out right now. Easiest way to do this is just to put the tap in a vise. You can also do it with the tap handle and thread the tap in by hand, and then tap it out the other way with a mallet and a little Allen key. But this is the easiest way. We're just gonna thread this on here about 5 or 6 turns. And a little pro tip, back it off a little bit. That way the pedal's nice and loose. It'll be easy to get the bushing off. Give it a yank, just like that. And then we can remove. There we go. All right, now that we got our bushing out of the pedal, we can go ahead and give that a clean up using some Q-tips. Make sure you get the seal surface nice and clean, the inside of the pedal nice and clean, especially if there's a lot of gunk and old grease in there. I'm also gonna use a rag. I'm just gonna fold the tip of it over like so I can almost like screw the rag into the pedal. And it's okay if there's still grease in there as long as there's no debris or anything. And then like before, just make sure that seal area, the channel inside the pedal is really clean. and then any bearing surfaces. Now let's go ahead and grab our spindle. We'll get our bearing and the spacer pulled off. Obviously, if yours didn't come off of the pedal, you can leave it in there for now until you pull the bushing out, or pull it out with a tap. You're not gonna mess anything up. Let's go ahead and pull the seal off. You can do this by hand or with a pick, and there's just a small lip on the spindle that retains the seal. We're gonna go ahead and use the spindle to seat the new bushing into the pedal body, and this is really easy. Seat it onto the pedal, and we're just using the lip on the spindle. And make sure that the chamfered side is going into the pedal, or else obviously you're not going anywhere. We're just gonna seat it by hand a little bit, get it started. You don't need to push it in all the way. And now for this step, you can either put the whole pedal in the vise and close it till it stops, or you can just put the pedal on the table, give it a few taps with the hammer. Obviously, you can hear there that it's all the way in. Now, you can use your pick and just make sure that there's no leftover bushing material. Obviously, if there is, just give it a little scrape and grab it with a Q-tip there. And this is a good time to just make sure that seal surface is nice and clean. Let's go ahead and get this cleaned up. Now, if you haven't touched your pedals in about a year, you might notice that the spindle's wearing down a little bit, just with corrosion or wearing off from the bushing. You'll notice that they clean up really nicely with a little bit of Scotch-Brite. The spindle will look like brand new. Nice hardened steel with a ceramic coated spindle interface, so it's made to last. It'll clean up just fine. Then the finishing touch, we're gonna wanna use some rubbing alcohol or brake cleaner, what you got in the garage, just like a alcohol type cleaner. And we wanna make sure that the spindle has no grease on it whatsoever, and then it has like a really dry surface, like squeaky, squeaky clean. All the way down to the threads, that the whole thing is spotless. Okay, now that we got our spindle nice and clean, we're gonna go ahead and pull our new seal out of the kit. And I'm just making sure there's no grease on my fingertips. Slide that thing down. Now it should almost squeak as it goes on because it should be really dry and grippy. Then I'll even take my pick and make sure that there's no grease on it. And I'll use the pick, get around the seal, and seat the seal past the lip on the spindle. Now you should be able to hold it in your hand and give it a little twist, and that seal should be stuck on the spindle really good. And this is important because the seal is supposed to spin with the spindle inside the pedal body, and that's what gives you really good sealing from the pedal, from the elements and all that. So make sure that this step is, like, you're paying attention here. So just give it a little twist in your hand. Obviously, if it spins, it'll spin easily. And now our spindle is ready to go back into the pedal. We're gonna go ahead and put some grease in there. If you have a grease gun, we do 5 pumps of grease in here. You could just put it right on the bushing. If you don't have a grease gun, you can just use the tip of the grease container and squeeze it in there. The important thing is you don't wanna get a ton of grease on the seal area inside the pedal. And the reason for that is when you go to seat the spindle on the pedal, that leftover grease will go through the seal and it'll create like a slick surface, and we wanna keep that seal nice and tight and dry on the spindle. So after you get your grease pumped in there, I'm just gonna go ahead and move it around on the bushing, and then I'll take what's left over on the Q-tip and I'll just wipe the seal area. You don't want it gushing out of there. Just a little bit, it'll do the job. I'll wipe that off on the bushing so we get everything on there. And you can even take the Q-tip and put the leftover on the spindle. Then go ahead and grab your smaller bearing from the rebuild kit, get that loaded onto the spindle, and your bearing spacer. Always replace the bearing spacer because it's designed to crush a little bit when you assemble the pedal, so that's really important. And these are measured by me before I package all these kits, and these are down to the 100th of a millimeter, so use the spacer, it's very important. And then next step, we'll just give this a little spin, don't push it too hard. We just want to spin a little bit and move the spindle back and forth until you feel resistance. You'll know that the grease is like thoroughly captured on the spindle. And then you can just push it to where the outside of the seal is flush with the pedal. Sometimes it'll spring back at you, which is okay. If it does that, no big deal. We can just burp it a little bit with the tip of a zip tie. There we go. And then next step, what I like to do is I'll cut a little piece of rag, maybe a couple inches long, and I'm gonna wrap that around the spindle, and this is gonna keep things clean. Any leftover grease, it's gonna get captured. So I'll just take it and I'll wrap this around the spindle right above the seal. And then from there, I'll just hold it a little bit with my finger and I'll just give the pedal a little wiggle, just like that. And you almost hear the pedal, it'll kind of make a slushy sound, and that's how you know that the spindle sat in there all the way. And I'll give it 2 or 3 turns and just go ahead and grab that rag, pull it out. Now this next step is the really important part. Make sure you got the seal fully set into the spindle, because obviously if you turn it right now, it's gonna have a lot of resistance. So I'll cut a zip tie with a little hook on the end of it. And I'll use that to get around the spindle, and I'll seat the seal into the pedal. You're just barely poking it. And you'll hear it, if you're listening carefully, you'll hear the seal. It'll make kind of like a slushy macaroni and cheese noise. That's how you know it's seated in place. You're just giving it a very light poke. And that's how you know you got it, because you can spin it and it's nice and free. And if you did all this right, you'll know that the seal is it's well seated on the spindle, and it's gonna be spinning in the pedal nicely. Awesome, that is a good spinning pedal. So now, you know, obviously, because you're spinning it in your hand, it spins great. Now we're ready to button this thing up and get you guys back on the trail. Go ahead and grab the larger bearing out of your kit, and you're just gonna drop that in, boop. And you might need to give it a little persuasion with the pick. Don't push it too hard. It's a slide fit. So you're just lining the bearing up around the spindle, just giving it a little light tap. That way, when we go to put our nut on the end, it'll just thread right in. So now we're gonna go ahead and grab our 8mm nut. And I like to seat it into the socket. That way I don't have to grab it with pliers and a microscope and all that. I could just put it in the end of the socket and we're good to go. And I'll start it by hand. And right when you feel that overlock engage, obviously you'll need to get a wrench on there. And you're gonna torque this to 7 Newton-meters. And the easiest way to do that is load up your tools, wind it up. Once you feel resistance, I like to put it against my chest. That way I'm not holding it in the air and prying the torque wrench, but I know I have a real accurate reading on the end of it. That click. Sweet. And go ahead and give it a double check. Make sure it spins good. If anything sounds weird, this is where you can take your mallet, hit it on the table, or even hit the spindle, and this is just gonna seat all the new parts in there. Oh, look at that. Now it spins great. Make sure you do that. You're kind of breaking it in by hand on the table before putting it on your bike. Now we know we're good to go. Now you can go ahead and replace your end cap, the 6mm Allen wrench. Please don't get crazy on this, it's aluminum. You put a steel tool in there, you're gonna turn the thing into a circle. And this is also gonna be torqued to 7 Newton-meters. Obviously, if this thing's getting worn out, you've hit it against some rocks and stuff, it's okay to just nip it up by hand. You'd rather just have it on there and tight than try to put 7 Newton-meters in it and strip it out. We have replacements of these. You can shoot us an email, a call, whatever works. And I'll just put this on the table on the same thing. I don't want to pry the torque wrench. I just want to hear it click. One last little check in the hand. Woo! And that's it for the pedal rebuild. You can go ahead and toss your old stuff. Like we mentioned, do not use any of the old parts, especially the spacer, especially the nut. This thing's ready to go on your bike. Repeat the same process for your other pedal. All the parts are the same. Bolt this thing up. If you do need replacement parts or pins, you can see us on the website, or shoot me an email if you need a replacement spindle or a specific small part. We'll get you set up. Cool guys, safe riding. Thanks for watching the video and stay tuned for more stuff.